So thank you very much, Simon, for these opening remarks. Really gives us a fairly broad canvas to work on here today. And again, thank you to FCDO for making this all possible. Now, our first session is going to try to answer the question, what effective aid looks like for governments that navigate protracted crises. And we have, over the next 45 minutes, we have two panelists who are unfortunately going to have to join us on screen because they were unable to navigate the visa challenges on time to be here with us today. But I hope that we still will be able to have a good open discussion around these issues and a candid discussion sort of from the heart of the challenge. First, drawing lessons from Palestine with Dr. Hassan Abdel Muhsen, and secondly, to get perspectives from G7 plus member countries with Habib ur Rahman Maya. So while many crises demand global attention, Palestine clearly stands out as one of the most acute and politically complex contexts. If we are serious about generating lasting impact and about providing meaningful support where the needs are greatest, we cannot shy away from Palestine. The scale of the violence and of the destruction, together with the geopolitical constraints in Palestine, create an exceptionally challenging environment for impactful support. Just to get some numbers, some perspective on this, since 2023, Palestinians have been enduring what key organizations have termed a genocidal attack. Over 70,000 killed in the Gaza Strip alone since 2023. And that followed decades of occupation, violence, and displacement. Gaza has experienced one of the sharpest economic contractions recorded globally since 1960. And today, per capita income in Gaza is roughly 1/20th of that in the West Bank, and the second lowest in the world, standing at around $160 per capita. Now, the prospects for self-reliance by the Palestinian authorities in this crisis are severely constrained by structural features of their revenue system. And I hope that we're going to hear a lot about that here today on the panel. As many of you will know, a very significant share of the Palestinian Authority's revenue base consists of customs duties and income taxes collected by the government of Israel from Palestinians. And although these revenues are paid by Palestinian taxpayers, the government of Israel had already been unilaterally reducing the volume of transfers over time, and transfers reportedly stopped altogether since May 2025. And the fiscal impact is very substantial. In 2022, before that stop, revenue transfers totaled around 10.6 billion new Israeli shekels. And that fell to only around 1.5 to 2.5 billion shekels by 2025. So we're talking about an 80% decline in fiscal revenue. And given the scale of economic contraction, around 30% overall for West Bank and Gaza, with Gaza, of course, disproportionately hit, and the destruction that we've seen, the Palestinian Authority has very limited options to generate alternative revenues. Current aid levels come nowhere close to compensating for these losses in fiscal revenues. And this dynamic with Israel also undermines access to innovative financing instruments such as concessional or blended finance because of the uncertainty of revenue transfers. Palestine is classified as debt distressed, despite a relatively low debt to GDP ratio, which is around 30%. Interestingly, however, and perhaps unlike most fragile and conflict-affected settings, Palestine has strong and solid banks. What role could they play, for instance, as conduits for development funding to small businesses and services and other destinations? Now, recognition of Palestine as a state by some international actors has been an important step towards self-determination, but still, there are major structural obstacles to peace and economic autonomy. Now, today we have a valuable opportunity to hear directly from representatives of the Palestinian Authority about their experience of navigating these challenges, including reflections of how aid flows can be better structured to support their response. And to connect those reflections, as I've mentioned at the outset, with insights from G7 plus countries. Those countries have long advocated for more effective international engagement in fragile and conflict-affected contexts. On that note, I would like to introduce Dr. Hassan Abdel Mohsen, the Assistant Deputy Minister for Planning, Projects and Infrastructure at the Ministry of Education and Higher Education in Palestine. As I mentioned originally, Dr. Hassan was unfortunately able to join us in person because of these visa issues. But we're really delighted that he can be with us online from the West Bank. Dr. Hassan Abdel Mohsen previously led systems capacity and workforce development for the Ministry of Health. And he has also developed and led national training strategies and plans across the civil services sector. Dr. Hassan, what is the situation like in Gaza and the West Bank, and to what extent has the aid sector been able to help you and your colleagues navigate these challenges? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Hans. I am very grateful and thankful for inviting me to represent my people and my ministry here in this very important event. I would like to answer you, but through giving some examples. First of all, we Palestinians are proud to present ourselves all the time. We are a country with a very with a scarcity of resources, so we don't have that much resources, natural resources, and we do not control the scarce resources that we already have because of occupation. In Palestine, we see our kids and ourselves as investment for the future. So the education is linked deeply with our culture. So the most important investment for our future is our kids and education. In Palestine, the student cost for the government is almost $1,100 annually. We spent almost 22 to 23% of our budget on education and higher education. We are one of the highest countries all over the globe of the enrollment rate. The enrollment rate in Palestine is 99.7%, which is one of the highest. 36.7% of our teachers are female, and 51% of our students are female. We have 77% of our schools are covered with consultancy, psychosocial support, and this gives you and all of the attendance a simple picture about the education in Palestine. In Palestine, the context is very hard for education, and not only for education, but for every life, for daily life, for the citizens and the government and everyone. But I will focus on the education. I think one of the most, all the problem of education is related and linked and delivered and driven by occupation. So if we went deeper in Palestine, in all over the globe, according to every law, education is a human rights, and Palestine is not an exception. So it is their right for those kids to be taught, and we need everyone to deal with the education system from and to see it from this window. The law and the declaration, international laws, it is a right, it is not a gift for any students or any kids. wherever he stand or wherever he live in Palestine or Ukraine or any part of the world. And Palestine is not an exception. And another major issue in the Palestinian context is that many of our partners trying to deal with the situation as in an ordinary way of management or project management, but it is not an ordinary situation. Non-ordinary situation requires a non-ordinary way of dealing with projects and emergency response. If we want to know what are the exact problems that we suffer in education system by the occupation, it is the continuum which will give us a picture how to finance the needs that are resulting according to those problems. The first one is the continuing aggression on schools and premises of education. And everyone knows that almost 40 or 94% of our schools were bombarded in Gaza and needs to not rehabilitation, but to rebuild again, or a major rehabilitation that needs more than 6 months to 1 year of rehabilitation. And we know that there is a continuous aggression on schools in the West Bank. So many of our schools are demolished, and many of them were closed under closure, and many of them are now out of service because because they reallocate the citizens from the north of West Bank. And the other aspect of it, many of our staff in Gaza and West Bank were killed by Israeli army, and many of them were jailed. Many of them are injured now, and same case happened to the students. More than 40,000 students are jailed or killed or injured, and 4,000 education staff suffering from the same case. In addition to that, a quarter, 22% of our education system is supervised and provided by UNRWA. And everyone knows what kind of measures are being took by Israeli occupation against UNRWA school and UNRWA system of education, and not only education, UNRWA system, but education consists of 22% of our education system. So all of these aspects and the siege that make the schools out of services in many areas in West Bank and in Gaza, our centers, many of our education centers, temporary centers, were reallocated for 11 times because of the continuing aggression and continuing reallocating of citizens. All these obstacles and aggression on education system needs to hire new people, needs to rebuild and rehabilitate the schools, need to support students and parents and teachers on the emergency situation. All these needs are costly. And we, as I started my points, we are a country that is suffering of very scarce resources. And when you have a teacher and he is now for 4 years, he have been not received his salary. He received a portion of his salary for more than 4 years now because of the siege, financial siege and conduction of our taxes by Israelis. And how come he will support his family and then he can think how to support the kids in the school? His kids are suffering from his financial crisis. I think, and we believe in Palestine, that the partners' role, international and UN agencies, international organizations and UN agencies and friend countries, is very important for Palestine. It's very critical for continuity of the services for the Palestinian citizen. But for our problem in the education system that most of our partners don't see education as a life-saving issue. So most of the support, they think about humanitarian and they focus on that part and they don't see education as a priority. But in our culture and our beliefs, we don't have in Gaza, we don't have homes, we don't have any kind of support. And when they were, at the time they were all under suffering of no food. The continuity of virtual education, we kept a continuity of virtual education for more than 50% of the students. And they all the time were hungry and they have no food or no place to sleep. So it's very important for us in our culture. I think we need what we expect from our partners, and most of them, all of them, and most of them are flexible enough to support. I believe we need more flexibility and to more flexibility with giving flexibility for the reallocation for the places that we are working on, because the emergency situation, we expect to obey it directly with no plans, with no long plans. Directly, we can send and gather our efforts in some place that is currently under aggression. So we need this kind of flexibility. We need a flexibility how to reallocate money from one component to other according to the needs, the emergent needs. We need our partners, and most of them do that, but we need to make them more linked to the priority of education system. When they proposed or design a project, it should be aligned with the priorities, and every partner should align his effort with all other partners and with the Ministry of Education under the leadership of Ministry of Education. One of the most obstacles that we are trying to overcome all the time is the sustainability. I believe the sustainability for the education system need us to focus on the Palestinian expert. Most of the projects are managed by foreigner experts, and after the project finalized, they leave. But if we invest on Palestinian capacities and teams, I believe the sustainability will be more effective at the education system. So we need to think about that. I will يعني wherever you want to look at the education system in Palestine, you will find a gap, a financial gap, and needs to be bridged all the time and everywhere. But I think, and we believe, according to the planning, the strategic planning document, we have priorities. Some priorities are more urgent than others. For example, many of our partners focusing on curriculum now. Curriculum. Everyone, every time you see someone, he asks you about curriculum. I think enrollment is more important and more priority. I think the safety of the students are more priority. I think the shortage of education staff at the system is more priority than curriculum. It's important, but if we don't send the student safely to his school, he will not be taught. So what is the need for the curricula? Uh, I will not be take long time, but I think we need a support for a developmental more for developmental efforts, not for humanitarian. I think we need to think to support the education system in Palestine and support students and kids in Palestine with no, let's see, with the easiest way, not dealing with that under a situation that it seems every day that it is an emergency situation. We need this kind of flexible and this kind of short time answering and responding to the situation. One of the most important points, as I start my presentation, we need our partners to think about education for Palestinians as a right. So we expect more sharp situation when they talk about it. I don't believe how, till the moment, many of our partners talk about the situation in Palestine under the umbrella of conflict. It's not conflict, it is occupation. It is aggression on the system of education. It's not hot zones. It is aggression on schools. It's very clear. It is aggression on the teachers while they are commuting to their schools. It's not a conflict. And when some partners is providing us with schools, we need a more sharper and more clearer stand when occupation attacked this school that was built and developed and improved by EU, for example, or GBE or some of our partners. We need their stand to support and to protect those schools because we don't have the ability to protect them. So at least the schools that are developed and improved and built by our partners, we need to hear a higher voice when they are under attack. It's very important role, the role of our partners is very important. And I think it is a major reason of our sustainability in the education system in Palestine. Again, I think in functional way, we need to think in much easier functions and measurements and procedures to deal with this emergency situation all the time. I think we need to plan everything earlier stage and design it with the priorities of the sector, the education sector in Palestine and the ministry strategy. And please, we want the ministry to have the leadership. Leadership create ownership. So the leadership will give us the opportunity to align all efforts in the sector and in the cluster, and we don't have a luxurious situation to spend any penny out of a priority. So we need every penny to go to the right direction and every kind of support, especially capacities support, technical support to go to its priority. There is a priorities that we need to set. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for being for take too long time. And thank you, Hans, and everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. This was a very clear and vivid, really, impression that you're giving us there of the situation. I'm taking what you said now at the end as a particularly important message. Leadership creates ownership, and leadership, it is the Palestinian authorities and the education ministry's leadership that needs to be backed and financed, and you need to have the flexibility to implement, to work with your own capacity, and that requires financing. But also, you pointed to the importance of political and moral support, if I can put it this way, from the partners. Now, with that, I'd like to turn to Habib Ur-Rehman Mayar, Deputy General Secretary of the G7 Plus Secretariat, based in Dili, Timor-Leste. Habib leads on policy and advocacy for better engagement in fragile situations and led the G7 Plus mission in getting observer status at the United Nations, which was granted in 2019. He has actively engaged in global policy discourse on aid effectiveness, on peace building, state building, and on Agenda 2030. Habib has authored several blogs and pieces on the related matters, including a chapter on the G7 Plus in the recently released Handbook of Fragile States. Just to mention that prior to his role at the G7 Plus Secretariat, Habib was head of the Aid Coordination Unit in the Ministry of Finance of Afghanistan for 5 years. Habib, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us. Now, reflecting on the insights that Dr. Hassan has shared with us on the current situation in Palestine, to what extent does current aid financing, the management of aid financing, enable self-reliance in conflict-affected communities in the long term? Habib, over to you.
Well, thank you, Hans, for the nice introduction. Good evening from Delhi, Timor-Leste, the headquarters of the G7+. It's an honor to be in the company of such distinguished minds, though virtually. I appreciate the insights shared by the previous speakers. Mr. Simon already made our job easier by highlighting some of the emerging evidences to the issues that I would like to share with you. And Mr. Hassan for highlighting the real-time challenges faced by the people of Palestine. Although each of the contexts is unique, we deeply sympathize with the hardships endured by the people and the efforts of the state authorities in places like Palestine. This sense of empathy and solidarity is what binds the members of the G7+ together in our shared vision of achieving self-reliance. To resonate and reflect on how effective financial aid has been in achieving self-reliance in conflict-affected states, allow me to begin with a short anecdote from Afghanistan. In 2008, that's when I joined the Ministry of Finance, following the major pledging conference in Paris. Our Director General of Budget was returning home. As many of you might recall, the conference mobilized billions of dollars for Afghanistan's reconstruction. On his way back, while transiting through Dubai, he ran into a member of parliament who had just seen the headlines announcing the pledges that excited every Afghan. Excuse me. The member of parliament asked him with a genuine curiosity, "So how is all the aid money coming to Afghanistan?" The Director General Budget replied jokingly, "It is all in cash. The Ministry of Finance is carrying it. The Ministry of Finance will be custodian." And you all know that, of course, that was not how it worked. The Ministry of Finance was not the custodian, nor was the aid fully under the government's control. In Afghanistan, 80% of aid spending was off budget, managed by parallel systems through the state institutions, with each ministry housing hundreds of project implementation units, which were called PIUs, that only lasted as long as their projects. Such arrangement only created fragmentation, salary disparities, and weakened state capacity. Yet the Afghan public believed that the beneficiary of all the aid coming to Afghanistan was government, and that it was their responsibility for delivering visible change. That gap between perception and reality created a profound mistrust. The state was held accountable for resources it did not control. At the same time, some assistance did flow through channels that reinforced this confusion that concerned the curious member of the parliament. Through winning hearts and minds strategies, military members of the International Security Assistance Forces, which was called ISAF, carried out community projects with little involvement from provincial or national government officials. Some of these initiatives, such as schools and clinics, lacked actual teachers or doctors. Although aid was delivered and funds were used, responsibility for these projects remained unclear. This anecdote is not about logistics. It is about ownership and accountability. And Mr. Hassan alluded to the sense of ownership. It raises a fundamental question: who truly controls aid resources and who is accountable for their outcomes? In contexts such as Palestine and other conflict-affected countries, where war has destroyed infrastructure, weakened institutions, and fractured social cohesion, financing is never just technical. It's deeply political. As the experience from the countries have shown, financial assistance is expected to rebuild institutions, restore trust between citizens and the state, strengthen social and political cohesion, and lay the foundation for self-reliance. This recognition informed global reforms efforts, including the New Deal for Engagement in Fragile States, which was championed by the G7+ and very well supported by partners like ODI. Its peace-building and state-building goals, alongside the trust and focus principles, emphasized national ownership, alignment, flexibility, and mutual accountability. The ambition was to harmonize aid around building peace and resilient institutions rather than simply dispersing funds. Yet in practice, aid has often drifted from these principles. It remains fragmented and projectized, shaped by short funding cycles and narrow risk frameworks. Success is frequently measured by disbursement rates and short-term outputs rather than by strengthened institutions or sustained legitimacy. It was precisely this frustration that led the creation of the G7+, a platform through which conflict-affected countries could collectively advocate for a rebalancing of partnership and for financing aligned with the goal of stability and self-reliance. And against this background, I would like to leave you with 3 points as our collective aspiration, and hopefully that could shape also the discussion in the rest of the day. First, today we face an era of shrinking aid and budget and fiscal pressure, as Mr. Simon also referred to it. While this presents serious risk, it also presents an opportunity. The current strain on the system makes us reconsider our shared goal. We must redesign financial mechanisms to serve their deeper purpose, and that is to help building peace, stability, and institutional capacity. This requires humility from the international community and honest political dialogue with least developed countries, and particularly those affected by conflict and fragility. Reform in aid system cannot be technocratic alone. It must be relational. Second, to successfully reform the aid system, it's essential to acknowledge that the provision of services such as education, health, and social protection are the ultimate responsibility of the state. When donors continually sidestep the state system and impose their priorities, they slow progress towards the objectives. Financing flows, whether humanitarian, development, or climate-related, must be harmonized around a shared vision of strengthening national capacity to generate revenue, manage risks, and delivery of the services to the citizens. The humanitarian, development, peace, and now climate nexus cannot remain theoretical. It must be reflected in the architecture of financing itself. Predictability, flexibility, and alignment with national system are prerequisite for the shared goal that we seek. Third and final, conflict-affected countries, such as those in the G7+, possess decades of lived experiences navigating complex financial flows, managing reforms under pressure, and confronting both progress and setbacks. Much of this knowledge remains underdocumented. If we are serious about reimagining financing, we must elevate these experiences and integrate them into the research, policy designs, and global reform debates. Reimagining financing is not about new instruments. It's about learning from those who live with the consequences of existing ones. Let me conclude by returning to the anecdote of the Director General of Budget. The Minister of Finance was not the true custodian of the aid. The aid spending was not in control of the government, but the people believed it was. The belief shaped expectations, and when expectations were unmet, legitimacy suffered. That formed one of the reasons Afghanistan, after 20 years of hope, faced a drastic civilizational and development reversal. To measure the effectiveness of finance, we must also ask, who is the real custodian? Who owns the resources? If the answer is not the institutions or the people or the state accountable to the citizen, then we should not be surprised when trust erodes and dependency will persist. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Habib. This was a very powerful intervention. I don't want to kind of repeat the very well-structured conclusions that you put forward, but they're, of course, very much in line with what we heard from Dr. Hassan before. Just as one point that you make about that this current moment actually presents an opportunity because of the collective need to rethink the way we do things, and the willingness, I think, on the part of donors to play a role just because of their budgetary constraints in thinking about how the building of domestic capacity, the support for in-country systems can be reinforced. So with these two very, very useful and interesting interventions, I'd like to turn to the audience now. We had optimistically penciled in 30 minutes for the Q&A. Now that is going to be very difficult, but if Olya and the team bear with us, maybe they can give us a few extra minutes into the coffee break, so we have something on the order of 15 minutes at least for our discussion. So with that, I'd like to turn to the floor and in fact to the screen. Please, those that are joining us online, make active use of the chat and send us your questions. But we first open it up here in the room. A lot of food for thought that we've heard. How can fragile and conflict-affected situations, governments best navigate their challenges with the help of the aid community? What needs to change? Any views? Yes, please.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. My name is Fuad. I'm professor of global health and social sciences at Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and also Lebanon country lead of Rebuild, so FCDO, a funded project. Myself is also Syrian, listening to these two difficult, hard situation in Palestine, of course, and the cases in Afghanistan. To be honest, while listening, I couldn't stop thinking of what the Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben mentioned it as a state of exception, and describing the 20th century, and it seems now the 21st century, it seems that this state of exception is the state that we have it. And actually, that put a big question about the achievement after the Second World War, about the issue of state as the unit of thinking about that. And I guess that's, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Palestine, in Myanmar, in many cases, Somalia, I think there's a need now to rethink about what state means. And when thinking about what Mr. Hassan mentioned, that about the government without governance, which is the same in Afghanistan case, and in some cases that governance without government, that raised the question about how we think globally, collectively, about the issue of the state as a unit to start thinking about. I know this is not an exact question for both, but I guess this raised that sort of exception, it's not just protracted. It seems that this is, what we should live in for a long time. And I guess that raised about how to reflect on that in different sectors, health system, education system, economic, financial, all these issues, still thinking about within the shape of state or government as we know it after the Second World War. But I think now we are in a different era, in a different situation, and it's not only in fragile settings. The fragility expanded to be now in Europe, we see that, and definitely in Africa, in Latin America. So that sort of fragility that become more global. So how to respond that globally and not just, thinking how this could be translated from, humanitarian into development, or from, I don't know, first world into third world, and so on. So that's, just like a reflection on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fuad. Let me take a couple of interventions and then we can see how our panelists respond. Yes, please.
Thank you, Hans. My name is Abdul Karim Exayes. I'm a health system expert at King's College London and country director for NGO called Action for Humanity in Damascus, Syria. So we heard really strong messages from both Dr. Hassan and Habib Abdurrahman on the importance of local leadership, which I do agree. But especially in complex settings, two issues evolve when we think about relying on governments. The first issue is the capacity, whether they do have the capacity to absorb and manage. And second, the issue of accountability and corruption. Because especially in complex settings, these two issues are really important to think of when thinking of sometimes flooding countries and governments with a lot of external aid. So how do you think we can manage these two sensitive issues?
Thank you, Abdul Karim. Yes, I have the lady behind. And again, I want to tell our participants online, do make use of the chat. I hope you're sitting in the right chat. Please.
I'm Lama Shahadi. I'm a reporter with The National. The question is to Dr. Abdul Mohsin and what he expects in terms of support from the UK in rebuilding the education system, specifically what kinds of, whether it's political or stronger political support or help with reform or financing.
Great. Thank you. Shall we sort of give our panelists a chance to react? If I may just to add to what Lama just said, UK and perhaps other players as well that are relevant in your context. Dr. Hassan, do you want to react to what you've heard?
Thank you all for understanding the situation and believing of our right to defend our education system in Palestine. In fact, for my Syrian colleague, I think one of the biggest obstacles in Palestine for the education system is the multi-phases supervision for financial expenditure. For example, we do have a Palestinian law for budgeting and expenditure. And each one of our partners has his own law to obey, or let's see, bylaws to obey. So when I want to do something, I will go in two different phases of obeying a law. So if we want to give a leadership, full leadership for the Ministry of Education in any country, in any fragile state, I think we should go from micromanagement as partners, from micromanagement to macromanagement, and do whatever needs to be done to supervise, not from the shoulder, but from a balcony above. Try to do your effort to control your money and to see the effectiveness of using it, but not going through 100 phases of approval and 100 phases of getting something and filling forms while the situation is emergency. Let us all remember that when a school is under an emergency situation, like occupation, like a flood, like whatever it is, I think the student will never think about what kind of procedures we need to follow to bridge the gap. He needs an immediate response in his case. So this is the idea. We should give full leadership for the Ministry of Education in any fragile situation, with full partnership of control and supervision, and with creating some tools of a macro partner management for the thing, not micromanagement. There is a point. It was very excellent that was mentioned by my brother Habib. He mentioned that all the partners thinking on a project-based way of doing their efforts. We need to go through another approach. program-based, portfolio-based that is run by let's say a committee led by the ministry, and this will keep everyone looking to every other efforts, and this will keep everyone dealing with macro management, not micromanagement, which give more and more obstacles. For what we need from UK, UK is a partner for Palestine for a long time, and it is a partner for education system here. And we have many projects from UK. I think what we need urgently is the political support to protect the education system. This is a priority, especially in Gaza. In Gaza and in north of West Bank. We need this kind of a pressure to make the education system safe, to be to every and each child to be enrolled in. This is a high priority, and on let's say on interventions or priorities, other priorities level, I believe we have that strategy many times with our partners from UK, and they have it. We are focusing on enrollment, safe enrollment. In fact, we are focusing on the quality of education, all the measurement of occupation and all the acts. And after COVID, we have a huge gap of educational loss. Our teachers are giving 3 days face-to-face education, and by all means, it is not sufficient enough to have a high level of quality education. So we have education gaps that need to be bridged here in the quality of education. The governance part of it, we are working with many other partners on capacity development of the system and digitalizing it to support more and more virtual and hybrid education, especially for the people who are reallocated from their situation. I'm open. I think my colleague Lisa was here in my office and she listened deeply. My other partners from British Council are all the time here. So thank you very much, all my partners. Please see our strategy. Please revise our strategy, and you'll find very deep detailed about the needs. And the emergency plan, it shows what kind of emergency actions that need to be dealt with every day and every week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Habib, can I ask you to react very briefly? There are a couple of questions that I would like to just make sure that we all hear. Please.
Yes, very briefly. Very important question that Mr. Karim raised. First of all, we always face these questions and dilemma on capacity to absorb and also the corruption. I mentioned fragmentation, is one of the main reasons that undermine the capacity and also undermine the government's potential to, control corruption. You imagine, a ministry which is loaded with thousands, in 5 years, maybe thousands of project implementation units. And then you think about harmonizing and coordinating that within the structure, then of course it will undermine the capacity to absorb the funding. What we are trying to say is that if we step away from projectized way of doing things and ad hoc or short-term projects, and if we follow the one vision, one plan, that was the term that was used in the New Deal for engagement in fragile states, and then all the donors agree with them within that plan, I think we can greatly address the issue of capacity. First of all, we do have, the state authorities, they do have to address the needs of their citizens, and they do have the capacity in their own means. There are countries within the G7 plus, Timor-Leste, where I'm sitting now, they started from ashes, from zero capacity. And now today it is one of the emerging economies in the region. And they did it in a way that, was reflected in the principles of the New Deal. The second question in regards to the corruption. whenever we talk about, harmonizing or aligning the aid system with the government institution, this question arises. But have we ever asked ourselves that, is corruption only limited to the budget or the aid that is channeled through the government system, or just it is within, that government system, or is it even more in the aid that is externally managed? The experience of Afghanistan, which was always, referred to these cases that, we have billions of dollars coming. There was more corruption in aid that never was channeled through the government for obvious reason. First of all, there were 8 projects that were conducted or managed and done in less secure areas where the government did not have any access to go and monitor and evaluate the impact of those projects. And of course, when you start throwing money like that, and when I say that, it's all about disbursement, definitely there will be leakages. I believe, and again, based on the experiences, that if we take a systematic approach, there are forums. Even in Afghanistan, we had the JCMB, the Joint Coordination Monitoring Board, where the purpose was to hold the governments and the donors mutually accountable to each other. But unfortunately, those dialogues did not take place in the means that it was supposed to be. It was always about, fragmented approaches and, predictable approaches, and that's where, the capacity of the government was undermined to absorb to manage corruption. But on the absorption of capacity, look, some countries are in a very critical juncture. Palestine now, with the increasing recognition of the state of Palestine, this is the time where, the international community has to step up and prove that, yes, the Palestine state can take care of their, citizens. And there is no question of that they will not have the absorptive capacity. Of course, if you are trying to build what is the capacity and you do not use it, then it means nothing. We are just wasting our resources. So that's my contribution.
Thank you very much, Habib. Now, I'm going to get into trouble here, but I have 3 really good questions online. I don't know if there's any last intervention from the floor. And then, total of 5 minutes, and then like 1 sentence responses from our panelists, please. So let me start here on the floor, and then I'm going to go into the questions on screen. Yes, please. Yeah.
Hi, and thank you both for your presentation. My name is Ala. I'm based at Ala Dafala. I'm with Rebuild for Resilience, and we're looking at the role of diaspora. I think my question is informed by exactly that, and I'm curious as to your experience with non-traditional aid and how you found it in both for education but across sectors. Yeah, that's primarily my question. Thanks.
Thank you. And this lady, please.
I'm going to show some mercy and be very, very quick. I think it's very interesting. My name is Elena. I'm from YECA, a Spanish think tank. I think it's very interesting, the 2 points that have been raised about reinforcing local actors. And I think that's going to be, I hope that it's going to be dealt with more in the afternoon. And also the reform system, because I think that the flexibility and the ownership, for as long as big donors don't accept maybe a little bit more risk, handle the risk issue differently and release a little bit the conditionalities of donor reporting, etc. We're not going to advance a lot. And these are old issues that have been dealt with in this for over a decade by now. I just wanted to sow the seed of another element, which hasn't been mentioned thus far. And it's some governments of protracted conflicts just need to show up in the reports, because we're some forgotten conflicts and the hyper prioritization nowadays. This is like sort of a step 0 before we talk about ownership and flexibility, etc. Some needs, they're just not being taken by the net of the needs analysis. And I think that is, we've seen it with the last GHO. It is very worrying how, a lot of communities and a lot of people are just falling through the cracks. Just a comment over.
Thank you very much. Yes, so the forgotten conflicts and the experience with unconditional aid. Online, I have 2 comments that relate to very similar questions by Tom Trail and by Francesca Pinner from Education Cannot Wait. Those are around the question whether in many settings state legitimacy is being questioned, and how do aid systems deal with that question of legitimacy? Who should be supported other than government? What do we do when sometimes the most vulnerable communities are not necessarily a governmental priority? So that question of what do we do when the state itself is in question? And I have one question from Abir Tamimi from the Arab Network for Civic Education in Jordan to Dr. Hassan. He's asking about what given the constraints of financial resources and aid, what are the key priorities of the Palestinian government to strengthen domestic financing? And then finally, a question by Charlie Ashley, who asks that reflecting on the G7 Plus recommendation in the FCV consultation process, how well do you feel that the World Bank's revised FCV strategy responds to these priorities? Now, this is a lot to take in the minus several minutes that we are in. I don't know whether you pick and choose. Those are all very valid points, of course, with very, very brief answers. Please, Dr. Hassan, do you want to start again?
Thank you very much. I think the government in Palestine is all the time under the pressure of financial crisis and how to deal with the salaries, with the services, with everything. So one of the major activities that is related to self or domestic budgeting for the education and for the services, in fact, in Palestine, is to focus on the most priority issue projects and programs that can achieve sustainability, and all of those interventions are not related to let's say the symptoms of but to the root of any problem. We are trying our best to go for and to hunt and to handle issues that can, if we fix it, that can fix another issues, by the way. So for financing, it is not an easy job to do. It is not an easy job to do. All of our taxes, all of our revenues that come through borders have been taken by Israeli. So we are suffering now. For education, we have a program that was created by the Minister of Education. It was called Adoption Program. So each and every school in Palestine, each one we have a portal for needs. Each one of those schools has an access to this portal, which is called eSchool. And all of needs of this school can be implemented and entered there. Anyone, wherever in the globe, for diaspora or for companies, for everyone. For example, if I live in America and I want to see the status of my primary school while I was in Palestine studying, I can go there and see my school and see how windows it needs, how door need to be fixed, how everything related to school, everything. So I can directly go there and donate and help the school. This program was very helpful, and it is very useful to in Palestinian context. The diaspora help us a lot for the temporary center schools. But again, all of these interventions and domestic budgeting are rarely covered the needs, the urgent needs that are coming every day and bigger and bigger. It's very, very, very heavy duty to do. And we are suffering to cover all the needs. But this is what are we doing now? We are doing our best. And let's hope for the best. Thank you very much.
Rehman, Aya, any last observation?
Yes, very, very briefly, very quickly. First of all, on the forgotten conflicts, some of our member countries are among those forgotten conflicts. And I would say that multilateral institutions need to be supported with unearmarked, funding to pay attention to those contexts. And I'm sure you're going to confirm that with Simon or with other donors, whether that's possible. Second, on the state legitimacy, I think there was a gentleman who was also talking about a very good point about the state. First of all, for us, the only indicator now so far is that an internationally recognized state that are, defined by the conventions that defines, the human rights and democracy, and we should still hold that as our barometer. And where state legitimacy is questioned, of course, like my country, Afghanistan, or Myanmar, or otherwise, the best alternative is local actors. I think, now it's even easier than it was before. Then lastly, on the World Bank, we would want to see a whole of the bank approach in the reforms, and not only just through the FCV, that there is a unit. Of course, this is it shows that there is an increasing attention. But if all the arms or wings of the World Bank comes under that umbrella, and design specific programs for fragile and conflict-affected countries, then we can talk about some effectiveness, and then we can really enter into that dialogue. And this has been part of our conversation with the bank, and some of my ODI colleagues who might be there might remember that we have been pushing for that. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. These were really great interventions. I think they put us on a good track for today's discussions. The strong call that we've heard for the importance of supporting local systems and local solutions and local capacity to build that up, to not fragment, to respect local political accountability. Those are, of course, calls that are not new. I've been in this sector now for various decades, and this has always been there. Question is, does the current moment, with the cutback in funding and therefore a broader willingness to rethink things, give us an opportunity to really find better ways of proceeding? One interesting observation from our climate colleagues would be they are thinking around the concept of country platforms, which would put countries into the leadership and make them coordinate donors through these common platforms. Is that sort of something to think about here? With that, I just want to really thank, on behalf of Sarah, who will regain her voice eventually, and of Simon, if I may, I just want to thank you, Dr. Hassan Habib, for this really, really interesting set of observations from you. Thank you very much, and thanks to the audience as well.